A very good evening to everybody here. Welcome to the third Kalpana Chawla Space Dialogue being hosted by the Observer Research Foundation. Dr. Madhavan Nair, it's a pleasure having you here, sir, with us this evening. So very warm welcome. It's a lovely time to be in New Delhi. And one thing which there should be consensus on in this room is that no matter how hard we had tried, we would not have timed this conference better. So this is the perfect time to have a conference on space. As Rajeshwari says, yesterday demonstrated that it is possible for ISRO to launch 104 satellites, literally make it look as easy as dropping children off a school bus. So be that as it may, it's a proud moment for India and for the Indian space community, for ISRO, and especially for so many dignitaries present in this room, especially Dr. Nair, who've been part of the establishment of ISRO. So let me congratulate you, sir, for where we've reached. And ISRO has shown yet again amongst various other firsts, which include the Mangalyaan mission of 2013, that in innovating on a shoestring budget, perhaps they have no other parallel anywhere in the world. So it's a stupendous achievement. And India has come a long way today. It is one of the few countries that has the ability to put into place in outer space its own infrastructure and reap the benefits thereof. It's a tremendous ground which has been covered, and India's space program today is valued at over $40 billion if you count all the space sets, the ground-based infrastructure, and the value-added services that have accumulated. With stalwarts like Dr. Nair, I feel a bit hemmed in to say what I need to say about space, but so just let me recount and talk about 4 main themes or 5 main themes which I think are going to be discussed over the next 2 days. The first 2 relate to the realm of what we can call traditional space. And of course, when you talk of traditional space, the first thing which comes to mind is science fiction and Star Wars, the more glamorous theme of space as a frontier of security. Well, given the changes in international and regional security, as the geopolitics of the globe extends its tentacles deep into outer space, countries like India, no doubt, will be expected and will be utilizing their own space capacities for securing regional and territorial interests. I mean, that goes without saying, and for the safety of the space infrastructure. And at the very least, India will, of course, need to maintain a minimum technology umbrella and maintain capacities at par with other militaries and other spacefaring nations. So there has been talk in India also of deploying dedicated space systems. It has been exploring appropriate organizational structures. It is still something in its infancy. But from an organizational coordination perspective, the need will arise as we move on for greater coordination of defense space use between the various already established institutions. You have the DPAC, you have the Aviation Research Center, the NTRO, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and various other organizations. There is thinking today also about the creation of a defense space agency until a full-fledged dedicated space command or something like that may evolve in the future. And also a case for expansion of the integrated space cell for a more active role in the utilization of outer space within the armed forces. But ultimately over time, there will be the need to develop and let these grow into a space security doctrine that encompasses military space utilities and also spells out the modalities under which India would consider various offensive and defensive uses of space. I mean, that is the first theme on when we talk about traditional space. But there's a second, for our purposes, the more important theme that touches the lives of everyone, and that is space applications. We are seeing today the integration of space technology to expand the information revolution. so that the benefits of having space infrastructure are better utilized for the management and planning of natural resources, better managing our planning, our energy lifelines, our infrastructure, disaster management, early warning. And the list is growing with each passing day. Ultimately, geospatial management of resources, and the big thing about e-governance for the expanding of societal services right down to the bottom of the pyramid. And the Department of Space in India today is actually working with almost 50 other ministries and departments on something around 160 concrete projects to support various flagship programs of the Government of India, including Smart City Initiative, the Housing for All, you talk of land management, Clean Ganga, Digital India, and so on and so forth. And with the expanding demand for space-based services, India stands today, I think, at a unique moment where it must build deep systemic capacities within the Indian industry, create an ecosystem to deliver end-to-end space systems. And we have seen ISRO now enhancing its engagement with the private sector. And the coming years, I think, will well witness the changing face of India's space industry as industry consortiums are floated for the production of PSLVs or the integrated regional navigation satellite systems and various other space applications. So from these first two themes that belong to traditional space, we are already emerging into a third theme that spins off as a corollary and what we call the new space phenomenon today. The fact is that in 2015, globally, venture capital firms invested around $1.8 billion in commercial space startups. Now, this was more than double the amount of venture cash that was invested in the space industry in the last 15 years. There's a growing global industry of private companies and entrepreneurs backed by risk capital which is seeking a return, which is targeting commercial customers to profit from innovative products or services developed for space. And the signs are that this trickle may well be becoming a flood. December 2016, SoftBank led a $1.2 billion investment round in OneWeb, a company looking to provide global internet connectivity via low Earth orbit satellites. And India today, where it stands, I think should also be poised to take advantage of this new space phenomenon. The need is to systematically enable both the traditional as well as new space approaches and increase our capacity to deliver space-based systems and services. And therefore, as we move on, space policy within the country will adapt and evolve to support new space in order to further catalyze the multiplier effect which is possible from these ventures coming up. So that brings us then to the fourth theme, which is about the evolution of that comprehensive space policy. Now, at present, space policy as it stands encompasses three main strands, which is, first of all, is the SATCOM policy, laying down the framework for satellite communications, the norms, guidelines, procedures, so on and so forth. Then, of course, we have our remote sensing data policy, that is 2011. And then comes our technology transfer policy. Now, with the expanding private sector footprint in commercial launches globally, remote sensing, satellite communications, satellite navigation, there is a need for theme-based specific laws and regulations which will need to be added. While Article 6, 7, and 8 of the Outer Space Treaty establish the basis for any national space legislation, the gap between international requirements and the available domestic legal instruments will need to be bridged. Only then can international obligations as well as domestic requirements be harmonized in a way that serves as an enabler of space commerce through the facilitation of private enterprise. And that is something which we will need to grow into. And then finally, fifthly, given the global race for space as competition for the limited near Earth as well as outer Earth orbits hots up, there emerge issues pertaining to the global governance of these commons. Already there have been some moves to start thinking of shaping new regimes for better global governance. New players are emerging to stake a claim upon these commons. Nano-satellites with limited lives are going to make space increasingly congested. So we need new global frameworks and rules, norms, so that space is efficiently utilized and not cluttered, and the potential of space for all nations is preserved and protected. India's stand has always favored rules that are democratic and non-discriminatory, and outer space is going to be no exception. So over the next 2 days, we are looking forward to some extremely enriching discussions on these and various other themes. As for ORF, our effort has always been to be inclusive and try to bring in all stakeholders in this debate. We're extremely grateful for all our partners who have supported us in this, because we see our task as a non-partisan platform that can enable an open discussion that places all choices and all options upon the table. Therefore, with these words, I welcome all of you again to the ORF Kalpana Chawla Space Dialogue. Thank you.
Shri Sunjoy Joshi, distinguished delegates and friends. It's my proud privilege to be party to this third symposium on the ORF Kalpana Chawla Space Dialogue. In fact, last time itself, Mrs. Rajeshri has invited me, but due to other clashing priorities, I could not make it. But I'm today very happy to be in this hall, meeting all the veterans in the space field who have established their credibility and their performance in the respective areas. Of course, when we think of Kalpana Chawla, I think she was really a brave lady. You must think that the time in which she joined aeronautics course, there were not many lady engineers in the field, even in the other fields like electronics or mechanical and other areas. But she not only took to engineering, but also took a very challenging field of aeronautics here and studied well. And with that, she could get admission into postgraduate programs in USA and a very excellent academic career. So that shows the courage and conviction which she had. No wonder she has in the prime space agency, NASA. And from there, of course, you know her history very well. But it is very unfortunate that in an accident, the space accident, she lost her life. Well, I think we must pay our respect and homage to this brave lady of India. And she has set a real example for the new generation to follow. We have, from ISRO, taken initiative to name our meteorological satellites after her. It is called the Kalpana satellites. And 2 satellites of the series are up in the air. So we have already made her name permanent in the space history of India. Well, if you look at what happened in that accident, I don't know whether it was an engineering failure or a human failure. The shuttle vehicle, as you know, that it has been designed fairly well and built with all the caution and all those things. But in spite of that, it led to a catastrophic failure. But the signature of that was seen right at the launch pad itself. The insulation pad getting off from the structure and then hitting the return vehicle was very much seen. But then people took a view that it is not a very serious issue and one can manage the mission without a repair of the failed tile which is supposed to be protecting the space structure. Probably that is a human error, I will say. It is not really an engineering failure. And in fact, I was looking at the failures in the passenger aircrafts and other things which has happened in the last 2 years. Again, everywhere, it is a human element which leads to the failure. It's a wrong judgment, the human judgment which creates problem. But the facts are unfortunately so. If I look back in my own experience, the first SLV-3 failed. Before takeoff itself, there was an indication that there is a certain gas supply pressure on board has fallen to a fairly low value. Some of us, we just joined together, analyzed all the telemetry data, and made a spot decision the remaining gas is sufficient for the mission and cleared the mission. But it never occurred to us the gas pressure leak is due to some other reason than the gas leak itself. Basically what happened was there was a control thruster which was supposed to be test fired before we give the clearance for the liftoff. At that time, a solenoid valve got stuck and the entire the oxidizer which was stored on board depleted through that valve. This was in the year 69. And we did not have any sophisticated television or any other visual means to see on the launch pad. So it was only a black and white TV. And in that, some fumes were seen, but we never paid attention to that. We thought it was only the gas leak and allowed. But when the event has to take place in the second stage, there was no oxidizer and no control force, and the entire vehicle tumbled and fell to sea. Again, a human error. PSLV, the first launch was a failure. We had a wonderful system, all the controlled rockets and control system, autopilot, navigation, everything have been checked out and cleared and so on. But in spite of that, after the second stage, the third stage tumbled and fell to sea. Of course, there is a detailed failure analysis and we try to pinpoint what happened and so on. Finally, it turned out it's again an adventurous decision by the design team. During the process of manufacture, somebody made a mistake of putting the actuator on the wrong side. Instead on the pitch plus side, they put it on the pitch minus side. So, obvious thing is to reposition that. But instead, the designers came forward, it's a very simple job. In the autopilot, we can give a polarity correction and that will take care of it. Fine, we did that. We did all the simulation in the computer and it was working well. So with that correction in the software, we are allowed to fly. But in flight, what happened, just before the stage was supposed to be ignited, there is a fairly large disturbance from the lower stage. The net result is the entire magnitude of the error signal overflew the regime which is provided for that. In fact, those days, we did not have the sophisticated computer. Very elementary 8-digit Motorola microprocessor is what was used there. And the entire programming is done in a machine language. And the most significant bit was set aside for the sign bit. So when the magnitudes grew so much, the sign bit was reversed. You know what happens in a control system when the sign bit is reversed. So the entire thing collapsed. Again, a human, suppose if you have put a guard bit in between, things would have been different. But if you look back in the history of failures, this is what happens. But it is our ability to learn from the failures and then further go towards the success, which makes ISRO different. Today, I am very proud to stand before you. 39th launch of PSLV. It has put 104 satellites into space very precisely. That's something which I think is almost like a dream. Yes, PSLV has been performing well all these years. That's the hardware side, it's okay. But when you have got these 104 tiny objects fitted into the final stage of the rocket, how to plan that sequence itself? You don't want them to be colliding each other or with some other things on its way. So we had to carry out n number of simulations and then arrive at the optimum release sequence and then implement in the onboard computer. So this would have taken months together for the team to really finalize this thing. But the entire thing went so precisely and we are extremely proud that ISRO has done its job and shown to the international community we can do very complex missions. Yes, the same PSLV has taken us to the moon, it has taken us to the Mars and so on. So the so-called learning from failures and then try to see that failures are not repeated, learning from mistakes, and then establishing a robust design and implementation. That has been the real touchstone of ISRO. We have shown to the country and the world that we can do it. Well, not only that, our solutions have been cost effective. I quite often face this question, why ISRO is able to do this job at a very low cost? It's not really cost, it's actually the real cost only we are taking into account. Our overheads are minimum because almost everything is, the R&D part is within the organization. But we have roped in a large number of industries to share the workload of repetitive production. So this combination has really helped us to optimize the cost. Again, build on the pedigree of the systems which has been developed in the past. We did not develop a new vehicle to go to moon. We did not develop a new vehicle to go to Mars. So the entire launch system remains same. It's a question of trajectory planning, the mission planning, and then finally using the spacecraft propulsion in an optimum way to reach this. That's how finally Modi ji has announced that we could go to Mars in less cost than the auto rickshaw fare. So it's really so. But we have not made any fudging of the numbers or anything. It's the real actual money spent on it, and we're really proud that we can bring cost-effective solutions to that. Certainly, the PSLV has established itself in the global market, and it is doing the national needs very well. We have plenty of satellites for Earth observation or the other scientific purposes to be launched, and that is lined up. In addition, we give opportunity for the other countries through entries to take on commercial launch services. That's set up. GSLV, it has initially we had a little bit of teething problems, but today that again has flown very well. Now it will stabilize. So it will have double the payload capacity compared to the PSLV. Then comes the GSLV Mark III. It's going to be launched soon, maybe another couple of months. There again, we kept almost everything same except the final stage, which is the cryogenic stage. Earlier what we had was about 7.5 ton thrust. We went for a 20-ton design of our own. The 7.5 ton had some similarity with the Russian engine, so we have taken some inputs out of that. But that's a very complex engine because of that propulsion cycle employed and so on. We went for a much simpler design for the 20-ton engine. And I'm happy to say that ISRO has proven it on the ground, and soon the flight will be taking place. So that will take us into the 4-ton class of payloads in the geotransfer orbit. So with that, the country can be more or less self-reliant in the days to come. Now, of course, Mr. Sunjoy Joshi has mentioned about the space application. Again, ISRO has got a very unique position in that. Right from the beginning, we were concentrating on how the space-based assets can be put to use for benefiting the common man. The telemedicine, tele-education program, the village resource centers, these are classic examples of that. On the commercial side, we have got the VSATs, which are spread right through the country. Then we have the communication transponders. You get a bunch of television channels through your rooftop antenna. So all these are made possible because of our own effort of developing the geostationary satellites for this application. But the most important societal application which came out of is the disaster management. We were able to significantly contribute to that. Here, the space image taken from the geostationary platform is used to track the cyclone and make a forecast as to where it's going to hit. So this information can be made use of by the district authorities to evacuate that place so that loss to life is virtually made zero. In the recent event which has happened over Andhra Pradesh and Orissa coast, hardly 10 lives were lost. So whereas in the country like Manila, a similar cyclone hit and they have lost 10,000 lives. So we were able to put to use such a sophisticated technology of satellite observation, communication, and connectivity for giving the disaster warning, especially in a cyclone area. But other disasters like cloud burst, yes, still systems has to evolve. earthquake is something which is really, we don't have a solution for it yet. There are not proper signature which we can capture of the earthquake and how we can give a warning sufficiently in advance. So these are some of the areas where we have to work for the future. But I'm really happy to say that our Prime Minister Modi ji has taken this societal application very seriously. In his first Independence Day speech itself, he has said that the space technology has to be put to use. And not only in the speech, but he followed it up with specific action with various departments. And the Space Department is coordinating with various agencies to implement the space-based system for various national projects. But I can see the gap in this. One, of course, in the communication. Even today, there are about 60,000 villages in the country which do not have proper internet connectivity. How to reach internet connectivity to these remote villages? That satellite only can provide a solution. And that has to be provided in a cost-effective manner. We are going to provide the service to the villagers who cannot afford to pay even a 10 rupee per month. So that kind of environment, how to provide a service to the rural area, that becomes a big challenge. Then, of course, other thing is the computer connectivity. We have major centers for the various database and other applications. So their fiber to great extent can do that, but still providing high-speed point-to-point connectivity through the satellite definitely can help. Again, there is a dream that whether instead of having so many towers spread out all over the country, can we have the handheld devices connected to the satellite so that instant communication available any part of the country at any time. So these are some of the futuristic things which is awaiting us in the communication area. In the remote Earth observation system, yes, we have an edge over others. Our remote sensing images are precise. Even the last one which we launched is a sub-meter class imaging capability. And there's more than that, we have the hyperspectral imaging capability, radar imaging capability, and so on. All this put together, we have got a rich resource for monitoring the entire globe. But it is a sad story that quite often, even the Indian users are depending on the foreign data source for this. I remember that the Bhuvan, the Indian equivalent of the Google map, has been launched some time back. But it is just not only the map, but beyond that, a whole set of database which is required for the management of the country was conceived in that. And that is slowly picking up momentum. I'm sure soon that will become popular, and that can provide a very vast variety of services in the country. The government alone may not be able to take up this job. We have to have proper public-private participation in this so that we can really implement these programs again in a cost-effective manner. Of course, these are some of the immediate issues and problems. But when we look at the future, yes, I think we go back to the Kalpana Chawla event. If you track from there, the space shuttle is decommissioned. It is not available. And for access to space station, only the Soviet vehicle is available, the Soyuz. It is doing well. It is one of the most rugged designs. But there is no competition. You are solely dependent on source. Of course, Chinese have come out with a solution. They have launched about a dozen cosmonauts into space, and even some space module they have built with the idea of having their own space station and so on. This is a slot in which India should taking up the challenge. We have the wherewithal. Our launch vehicles have reasonably established a reliability level. I will say that most of the launch vehicles have got a failure rate. Even the best of one has got something like 5%. But quite often it may be 15-25%. But we are in the 5% bracket. So that is something which we can be confident of. But when we took up the study for the manned space mission, the first thought is, in case any mishap take place during the launch, how do you safely bring back the crew? So the crew escape mechanism right from the launch instant and up to the space. So this is something which I think the studies have shown. It is feasible, but we have to invest on that. Then, of course, we had to have the life support system and all other paraphernalia built in the space capsule and make it a livable module, and it can be made. So this program, I think, will not only, it's exposing to the cutting edge of technologies, but also activates many parallel systems and industries in the countries to come up. So it is not a prestige project, but more of a technology driver for the country. And it is high time that India should be taking up this project. Why I'm saying is that, yes, of course, you must be tracking the ISRO's performance in the scientific field. We spent very little budget, hardly 5% of our budget on the science programs. But in spite of that, we were able to do unique missions like going around the moon, mapping the entire surface, and then also, for the first time, confirming the presence of water on the moon. So this we could do in a shoestring budget. Again, the Mars, we were able to go there and take some images and so on, but probably the next Mars mission may be with actual lander and rover, and even the moon mission will be of that kind. So with the objective, ultimately, can we tap the resources from these places for our benefit? The helium-3, whether we can tap from the moon and bring back to Earth. Maybe robotic solutions are possible. But there will be many situations when you are running a constant business, presence of the human beings. So if you want to go towards that, the first step is to have the human space flight capability in the country. One thing is the launcher needs further improvement in reliability. Even this 5% failure rate, what you're talking about, is not acceptable. It has to be brought to less than 1%. So to that extent, the entire design has to be revisited. Some of the areas strengthening which is required has to be implemented and so on. And ultimately we can do that. And if you take the GSLV Mark III, it can very comfortably take this manned capsule to the low Earth orbit. And the remaining recovery, yes, we have demonstrated once how a spacecraft can be brought safely back to the designated place. Further perfecting of that for the bigger capsule is something. So all these technologies, if we put together, we can achieve that. Once we reach the Earth orbit, from there to the moon or Mars, it is realizable. So this is where perhaps the space program in India should be looking at. Of course, this calls for, as I mentioned, on the launcher, on the space capsule, life support system, the radiation shielding, and very, very vast majority of technologies which is not there today in the country will come in by spending this money. And the financial burden, maybe 5-6 years back we estimated, that is only 12,000. It may be around 20,000 crores today. And 20,000 crores for a country like India, it is peanuts. Definitely we can afford, we can do it. Of course, when we talk about the space policy, we mentioned about the treaties and other things. We are party to it. We are respecting that. But suddenly, what it occurred to me with respect to these tiny satellite launches, yes, they are very good motivation for the student community and the universities and other things. And even some of the commercial ventures, they want to introduce practical system. But what happens to these tiny objects after some time? To my best of imagination, maybe to live for 1 or 2 years. After that, it becomes a dead mass in space. We have, the NASA catalog says something like 12,000 objects identified, which is above 10 centimeter class. So we are added another 100 to that. So your probability of collision, etc., goes up. So if you add another 100 like that every few months, I don't know where we are heading for. One thing is the space scavenging. Already Japanese have come out with the idea you can have a big net by which you can scoop out all these things and dump to the atmosphere and so on. Maybe that's one solution. But we have to find again a cost-effective means of collecting this debris and bringing back. But that may take time. In the meantime, the thought which has occurred to me is, can we have a different corridor for these small satellites? We know that normally between 500 to about 2,000 kilometers altitude reach, we use for various applications, Earth observation or scientific observation and so on. So can we have a corridor below this Why I'm saying below this is naturally the drag will be slightly more effective, and with that the natural drag itself will bring down many of these objects, and it is away from the useful region where we want to put our satellites. So the policy, as a policy, can we put forward this idea, and can we see that a corridor is defined for these tiny satellites? That's something which we can perhaps, just like in the geostationary orbit, after useful life, you are supposed to kick it out by 150 kilometers or 200 kilometers. So like that, a policy guideline comes, maybe an immediate relief could be brought in. Then, of course, as far as the country is concerned, I think I am not boasting. Space is doing excellently well in terms of delivery. They decide a date and time, and the launch goes. It is just like the shuttle service which is running between the airports. So to that extent, they have perfected. Why not we bring the same thing in the aeronautics? I think in 95 onwards, we have been talking, discussing, debating, etc. We should have a civil aviation industry in the country. In the military segment, with a lot of difficulty and a lot of hurdles, we have done it. The LCA, it is integrated into the services after so many years. But it's a beautiful piece of equipment. So that means we can do that kind of technologies in the country. In fact, I headed a team some time back to make a feasibility study this. Again, we found that it is really feasible to do that. And maybe at that time we were thinking of a 100-seater which could do the shuttle service between the small airports within the country. And the market was very high. In fact, in a 5-year span, we were thinking of something like 200 aircrafts to be made available. So that is a huge potential. And with that, if we take on about 7 or 8 years, any venture which is talking on that can break even. That's the estimate given by one of the financial analysis. And the investment, the seeding money which is required was quite small. It is about 5,000 to 7,000 crores. At the time, Montek Singh Alwaleji, he was a planning commission vice chairman. He has listened at the entire proposal. He has said, yes, this seems to be a viable proposal. You invest this thing and develop the technology and have a manufacturing setup within the country with the private participation. In about 7 years to 15 years, you are going to earn a revenue of 500 or 600 crores. So he, on the spot, he gave the clearance. But somehow, it didn't take off. Again, I will point to certain managerial deficiencies. Some of my colleagues who are sitting here will say that it is bureaucratic, this thing, that thing and all. But ISRO is also part of the government. We have also bureaucratic setup and all those things, but we are able to do it. So my feeling is there has to be an aerospace development agency integrating the space and aeronautics industry put together and then taking up these initiatives. And there, the private partnership is very important. See, when we started in ISRO, this private industry were doing bits and pieces, some parts and components and so on. But now they are able to make the systems. HAL is rolling out the second stage of PSLV and GSLV. And similarly, some of the electronic industries are taking the entire equipment bay and other things. And now the satellite integration also they are going to take up. So it slowly builds up. Suddenly, if you go and tell that industry, oh, you do this aircraft manufacturing, they will throw up their hands. You have to hold their hands and bring up to the level of the technological base, what ISRO or the aeronautic, NAL or HAL has got, and then cultivate an ambience for bringing out this thing. So my dream is twofold. One is the manned mission, and other is our civilian aircraft. I hope for that is not only policy, a strong will that we can do, we will achieve. Thank you.